Let's take a look at the elements that should be included when designing tables. On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see an example table. This table has 3 columns and 4 rows. The header row has miles traveled, gallons of gas used, and miles per gallon. And the rest of the table has data for those 3 points. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the HTML markup of this table. It begins with a table tag and a caption tag. The caption tag describes the table. In this example, it reads, a comparison of miles per gallon data. Next, for each row of the table, you'll see a TR tag. Inside the TR tag, you'll either have a TH tag for a header row or a TD tag for just a data row. So you'll see that each of those header cells have their own TH tag for miles traveled, gallons of gas used, and miles per gallon. And as we work our way down the row and get to the data cells, we see the first row has 3 data cells for 252 miles traveled, 18 gallons of gas used, and 14 miles per gallon. And this structure continues on the same way throughout the table until we end it closing with a closed table. Now let's take a look at an example of a table that's a little bit more complicated because it has a couple of merged cells. In the table example on the left, this time the table has 3 columns and 5 rows. The header rows that span the top are category, ingredients, and amount. And the header rows that span the rows are dairy and sugar. The dairy row has 2 ingredients, milk and eggs. Because there's those 2 ingredients, that dairy cell has been merged into just 1 cell instead of 2 cells. And the same has happened with the sugar category. There's 2 ingredients listed on 2 separate rows, white sugar and brown sugar, and so the sugar cell was merged into just 1. So when we take a look at the right-hand side for the table markup, we see some familiar things. We still have the beginning opening table tag. We still have our caption tag with our chocolate chip cookie recipe caption. We still have TRs for each of the rows, and we have THs and TDs for the header cells and the data cells. The differences we see are that for the header rows in those TH brackets, there is now a scope element, and that scope says scope equals quotation COL for column in quotation. So this is telling the table that this scope of this header cell goes across the columns. When we work our way down to the next row, we now have a header cell, but this time the scope is set to the row because this is a header for the rows. We also see another element of row span equals 2. That's because this cell has been merged and it now spans 2 rows. When we work our way down the HTML markup for the table, when we get to the row that begins with the sugar heading, we see the exact same thing. This one has been set to a header cell with the scope of the row and a row span of 2 since it was a merged cell. So when you're working with tables, you always want to include those things: the table tags, the caption tags, and then all of your header or data cells inside the row brackets. And then if needed, make sure you're setting your scopes for your header cells and your spans for your row or columns that may merge more than 1 cell.